Now let's consider an area in which culture has played a huge role in how sexuality is influenced or shaped. That has to do with belief and expectation. Beliefs are ideas such as posits or empirical hypotheses about reality and about human nature. Beliefs, anthropologists and social scientists like to say, create our sense of shared reality. Beliefs are often regarded as sacred, as something that God has given or nature has given or the ancestors have given, something you don't challenge or tinker with. In short, beliefs are regarded as part of what is given in the nature of our existence. And beliefs in this way can be surrounded by taboos, by rules, by norms that help to guide and shape people's expectations about the behavior of other people. For example, if you believe that a child is incapable of learning, then you may not teach them in a certain way. If you believe that teenagers are going to be driven by their sexual hormones and be out of control, be raging, then you're going to try to control them. Or, for example, if you believe that people over the age of 50 or 60 have no interest in sexual behavior, you may ignore them. All of these beliefs are part of how we build our expectations and in turn then interact with other people regarding their own social reality and their belongingness to our culture. In this way, each culture creates expectations of its members about what is right and true and proper in being a member of their culture and in being normal and natural when it comes to their sexual behavior. For example, some cultures believe that masturbation is entirely normal and it just happens in childhood and they ignore it. But other cultures, and our own culture would be one, are very suspicious of masturbation and may even regard it as abnormal. Once upon a time in our society, we taught people that if you masturbated, you would become crazy, or you would grow hair on your hands, or other kinds of things, silly things of that kind. Some cultures believe that extramarital relations, if they're done in a discreet way, with dignity, are completely natural and normal. There's nothing strange about them. But many cultures disagree with that idea, and they would not allow any extramarital relations and regard adultery as going against nature or against society. And finally, there are many cultures that do not accept homosexuality, and they regard same-gender sex as being unnatural or abnormal, even though some of them are tolerant of homosexuality. Our own society has gone through a huge transformation in the last 30 years when it comes to homosexuality. And the majority of Americans now accept or tolerate homosexuality, even if in their heart they don't entirely believe that it's right or it's normal. All of these are ways in which sexuality is influenced. I want you to think for a moment about some of the things we take for granted. For example, do we think the body should be fat or thin, heavy or skinny when it comes to what is healthy? In the 19th century, in Victorian culture, it was a very strong belief that the heavy-set person, the rotund, or even the fat person was somebody who was healthy, somebody who kind of exuded a lot of rich, you might almost call it healthiness. Whereas the skinny person in society, which was identified, of course, with poor people, the skinny person in society was regarded as unhealthy and was not regarded as sexually attractive. And men in the 19th century were known to prefer women that were stout or plump or even fat. Now today, in the context of our 21st century United States, I think you know very well that the norm is to favor the high prestige, very skinny, very thin model who's beautiful, almost skeletal. You can almost see her bones or see his bones. And that kind of projection of what we regard as healthiness is so totally different than the Victorian norm, isn't it? And is regarded as sexually attractive, as something that people want to be like. That's all the emphasis we have on diets, all the discussion about being thin or being overweight, and all the controversy about being fat in our own society today. This is just one example in which culture powerfully influences what is the expectation regarding what is sexually attractive, what is normal, what is natural. In many societies, and our society is one of them, religion plays a huge role in influencing the cultural belief and the cultural expectation. In Western civilization, for centuries and centuries, organized Christianity has played a huge role in defining sexual beliefs and expectations. And the Judeo-Christian tradition from the time of the Byzantine Empire to the present, so that was around 1000 AD, up to the 1600s, which is around the time when Shakespeare was beginning to write his plays. In this period of time, sex was defined almost entirely by religious mores and the notion of original sin within the culture. And the beliefs within the culture about sex were also primarily shaped by the church. And for example, it regarded only marital vaginal sex as natural, and everything else was unnatural. Premarital sex was unnatural. Extramarital sex was unnatural. Masturbation, unnatural. Homosexuality, unnatural. Oral sex was unnatural. All of these were forms regarded by the church as unnatural. And sex, in a general way, was folded into marriage, kinship, and reproduction, and these customs were regarded as the fabric for all of sexuality. And anything outside of that was regarded as sinful. These are the ways in which our culture was shaped by Christianity and Judeo-Christian views about sexual beliefs and practices. And it continued pretty much that way until the mid-1950s, when Alfred Kinsey began his studies in the United States, partly influenced by anthropologists, partly trying to take account of culture and context. And he began to say, wait a minute, human sexuality in the United States is much broader than what the Judeo-Christian fabric has said. There's much more homosexuality, premarital sex, extramarital sex than the Judeo-Christian practice suggests. And so he began to recognize how our cultural expectations were changing. So today we understand that a culture's expectations do define how we grow up, what we come to feel as normal and natural, how we enter into intimate relationships. Culture also influences the number of children we have, when we should marry, who we should marry, what we should expect of our marital partner, many, many things like this. And of course, culture and religion influence our beliefs about reproduction, about contraception, whether we can use contraceptives, whether abortion is considered appropriate. These are very, very controversial questions still, and they are powerfully influenced by culture and religion. In all societies, we might say, religious culture provides for rituals and ceremonies that are very, very important in sexuality. A ritual is a prescribed sequence of images, roles, words, gestures, meanings, and actions. And rituals in many cultures guide and structure all of sexual development and individuality. One of the incredible things about the study of non-Western cultures, such as the Sambia and the Trobriand Islands, is to see very clearly their rituals and how they are elaborate in creating the experience of belief and context when it comes to sexuality. We have a little bit of this in our society. For example, we recognize the wedding ceremony with all of the powerful expectations. For example, the bride should wear white, she should be given away by her father. All of these have powerful traditions and history behind them, and they combine many separate little rituals into a very large event. But when we look at a culture like the Sambia, we see much more explicitly how ritual structures their sexuality. The Sambia in Papua New Guinea, whom I studied from 1974 right up to the present, they were an ancient warrior culture when I first started working with them. What I discovered was that they had a secret practice of ritual homosexuality filled with beliefs. For example, the belief that semen is not normal and natural, that occurs in humans, and it has to be introduced from one male to the next male through ritualized homosexuality. You will learn about that, their sexual culture, the context of war and belief, and their sexual rituals when you see the film that the BBC and I teamed up to make some years ago. That film should be available, we hope, next week. You will also begin then to understand in such an important way the role of cultural context, which in sexology previously was largely ignored. Remember that cultures are systems of meanings and practices. But when it comes to how people actually behave in particular contexts, for example, being in a classroom or being in church or going shopping or having sex with your intimate partner, these particular cultural contexts shape the meanings of our interaction. For example, whether you kiss somebody on the lips, whether you kiss them on the hand, or you kiss them on the cheek, or kiss them on the top of their head, each one of those kisses has a very particular different meaning which conveys to the actors in the setting what's going on. And these, in a sense, provide them with the instructions or the blueprint for what they need to respond. In short, culture is a blueprint for action, but the context supplies the details and the messages that we need to respond situation by situation. As we come to wrap up this first set of lectures, I want to mention one other thing that's a little bit more difficult to wrap your mind around, but I think you'll get it. It's the notion of cultural contradictions. Each culture is an ideal blueprint. It's an ideal, not reality. Each member interprets that reality a little bit differently. For example, we have the norm in our society that everybody should become a sexual actor by the time they get to be adulthood. We also have a norm in our culture that says, in many, many different communities, that a girl or a boy should remain a virgin until they get married. Now, is that the reality or is that the ideal? Obviously, for many people, it's the ideal, not the reality, because many people have sexual experience, and indeed, they are expected to have sexual experience because by the time they get married, they're expected to be relatively sophisticated in understanding sexual experience and being able to respond to their intimate partner, or if they are living together before they get married or they decide not to get married, they're expected to be able to have a smooth and relatively seamless sexual experience. But how do they learn that if they're a virgin? This kind of contradiction is very, very common. The culture may say, be sexually pure, while the peers or your media may expect sexual experience. Contradictions of this kind arise in many, many sexual cultures, and it's important for us to understand them and study them, because often it's the contradictions that provide the real key to understanding the system of sexual meanings and practices. So as we go through our course, we will be looking specifically at the contradictions that unfold in the ideal blueprint of each sexual culture. Let me sum up by saying humans, all of us belong to one species, but we have very different cultures that we belong to, and each one of us is a sexually unique individual we'll study as we go along. Sexual cultures vary greatly in the world, from being sex negative to sex positive. We will study what that means. Western sexology was a very particular form of investigation that came out of medicine and doctors and was strongly influenced by what preceded it. The culture of sin, the culture of religious orientation that gave way to a disease and medical evolutionary context. Also, I wanted to emphasize with you the importance of context and belief in defining the sexual culture and how people behave. And we mentioned at the end the notion that contradictions occur in each culture. Thanks for listening. We will continue our investigation, and we'll see before the lecture is over at the end of this full week, that the world of sexual anthropology is a rich and indeed very fascinating one.